Hello, and welcome to episode 71 of TBR, the To Be Read podcast, where we talk about the books we love and the topics that interest us. My name is Patrick Stemp, and as always, I have Jamie Maltman and Michael Ronn here with me. How you guys doing?
Hey Patrick, how are you this week?
Good. So this week we're going to talk about story mashups or genre mashups that we think that might be interesting to read. And first we're going to go through and do our weekly roundtable. How'd you like to go first, Michael? What have you been reading
Yeah,
this week?
I had a better reading week this week, or better reading week this week. Reading week, yeah, Elmer Fudd or something, I don't know. But I finished Triggers by Joe Sugarman, and I mentioned that last week, and that is basically, I guess it's the unofficial internet marketer's go-to guide when it comes to copywriting. So how to write compelling copy, and not only that, how to actually sell. So it's like a famous example from the book. I guess he had this revelation to write the book when he was traveling. He's a salesman, so he was traveling in New York in like the 1950s, and he asked for, what is it, vanilla ice cream with chocolate syrup on the side, and the waitress says, well, don't you just want a sundae? And he said, well, no, I just want vanilla ice cream with chocolate syrup on the side. And so she just kept fighting him and fighting him and fighting him, and he would do this every day. He would come in and ask for what he wanted, and she would say, well, it should be a sundae. And so one day he said, oh, yeah, I just want a vanilla ice cream. And so the waitress walks away, and while she's walking away, he remembered that he wanted the chocolate syrup, and so he says, hey, can you just go ahead and add the chocolate syrup? And she didn't fight him. She just went ahead and did it. And so he had a revelation and a breakthrough, because it's like, well, in order to, if you can get someone to say yes, then when you say the next thing, it's easier to get them to say yes to you. So that's kind of what the premise of this book is about: how to get people to say yes and how to keep them saying yes. So typical sales stuff, right? But I thought it was interesting. I liked a lot of the examples that he gave. I have read that some of the stuff is disputed. Like some people say, this stuff he's talking about didn't really happen, or it's kind of BS. But in terms of the storytelling, I really liked it. It's a bit dated. I think he wrote it in the late 80s or 90s, so you can kind of tell that some of the slang and maybe some of the stuff isn't as effective anymore. But in terms of philosophy and marketing strategy, I would totally recommend it. Really enjoyed it.
I think we've heard that advice before, and get people to say yes, like lead your sale with like, do you hate people who kick puppies? Yes.
Yeah.
And once you get them on that trail, then you've got them hooked.
Do you want to pay $97 for my product? Yes. Yeah, so I read that. So I recommend that. And then I read a book that kind of surprised me. It's called The Battle for Your Email Inbox by Robbie Slaughter. And I picked up this book because I kind of had a crisis earlier this week. Like, I got a report from this service that basically says how many emails I get every month. And I about had a heart attack and an aneurysm at the same time when I saw it, because it's like I knew that I'm getting like a ridiculous amount of emails every day, but had no idea how to actually solve the problem. And the book is
unsubscribe to everything.
Oh, that's even after unsubscribing, and that's not even counting spam. So basically, he poses an idea that basically states that email is basically for routing ideas. It's not for storing information. So that's the problem that I have, is that I use my email to store everything. So Patrick, we just had a conversation earlier today about finding a potential guest, stand-in guest for the show in case Jamie couldn't make it. Well, I would normally store that in a folder called TBR. Well, that's part of my problem. I'm never going to reference that conversation again. So why would I keep it, right? Yeah. So it's just thinking about things like that, and if it doesn't have a purpose, delete it. If it does have a purpose, get it off of the email. Right, so add it to your calendar, add it to your Evernote, or contact someone, put that person on your contact list, whatever, but keep your email inbox empty. So I am going through that right now. It's very painful, but I'm hoping that once I figure this out, my email will be a lot better. So, and then the third book I got as a gift, actually, in the March to a Bestseller event that was last week, and that is Why Authors Fail by Derek Depker. And he gave away a free copy of his book, and I entered a comment, and I actually won. So he sent me a free copy of his book and the audiobook. So I am not very far into it, but I look forward to reading that, and I can probably report on that next week.
He sent you a physical copy or an ebook?
ebook.
Ebook, okay.
Ebook, yep, and yep. So it's good stuff. I'm looking forward to reading it. It's pretty much his advice on authors and why they fail. So it's very. I think from what I've gotten, like the vibes, that it's very much like a mindset book, kind of
Mhm.
like Prosperity for Writers. Um, and I like those type of books because I feel like there's always something in it that you can get, even if you know a lot of the stuff that's in it. So good
Okay,
stuff. That's my week. Who's
okay.
next?
How
Jamie,
about you?
Patrick?
Yeah, how about you, Jamie? What have you been reading?
Well, I took a page out of your what, last week, the week before, or whatever, and I picked up Steelheart from
Okay.
the library. So that's Brandon Sanderson. His what is it, YA superhero
Hmm.
series that I know you're going to talk more about too. But yeah, no, I'm enjoying it. Probably maybe a third to almost halfway through, even though I haven't been reading as much this week. But no, it's pretty cool. It's different tone to his other books. Even I guess there's some similarities to Rhythmatist in terms of the tone, which is also like that one's a little bit younger, like boy at the or no, he's I guess he's comparable age because it's like university for stuff. So yeah, I guess pretty comparable. But just this that kid was more bookish, and this one is more streetwise on one hand, but then he's really geeking out on his stuff about the epics. So yeah, it's been pretty neat so far, and look forward to continuing that. And yeah, I think my son, I've just been reading some Rabbit's Invasion tie-in books with him, so nothing too exciting there, but he likes them, so he thinks they're funny. So yeah, that's pretty much my weekend reading.
Okay. Yeah, so I finished the second book in the Reckoner series by Brandon Sanderson, Firefight. And although I didn't enjoy it as much as the first one, it was still very good. There's quite a lot of exposition in these books, even though they do move pretty quickly. There's a lot of thinking on the part of the protagonist, trying to decide what he wants to do next, and thankfully he doesn't get too deep into it. I think probably in his more fantasy-based stuff, the adult stuff, he doesn't just so there's the thought processes, but then he'll also go off on the environment, and then he'll talk a little bit about the weather, and then
He does awesomely epic world building,
mhm.
but manages to get it flowing through through the characters and through what's going on for the most part. So he probably pushes the envelope for you on that to the edge, but without going over.
It's not too bad. I found there was a
Yeah.
couple parts in the book where I would read like the first sentence of a paragraph and then the first sentence of the next, but not a whole lot of that. Just a little bit. I tend to do that sometimes if it gets a little bit exposition heavy, kind of looking for the next line of dialogue. But overall, it moves pretty quick. I found that one thing he did a really good job, I think, of not falling into the middle book in a series trap. Like it's going to be a trilogy, and it didn't suffer by it being sort of book two. It wasn't all set up for the third book or anything like that. It's a complete story. It's a good story. It moves the characters along, moves the events along, and based on so the third book is coming out in February of 2016, and based on the title, Calamity, he's taking the series like exactly where it needs to go in order to kind of wrap things up in a neat little package when he finishes it up. So I'm looking forward to that. I just kind of wish we didn't have to wait until February to read it. And that's everything I finished. I started a couple things, but we'll hopefully talk about them next week if I can wrap them up. So we can get into our topic of the week, and we thought it might just be kind of fun to talk about some sort of like story mashups or genre mashups, probably more story. So for example, let me see, originally, it's funny, one of the things I that occurred to me when trying to do this is that it seems to be a lot easier to come up with these when you start with a classic,
Yeah.
which I think is probably why we see a lot of these, um, Wuthering Heights and zombies, or there's a ton of those, right?
Yeah.
Because one of mine, at first I thought, um, Sherlock Holmes meets the Terminator. And then I decided I'd rather see Sherlock Holmes and Face Off. Put those two stories together with, of course, John Travolta and Nicolas Cage as Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty, do the whole face switching thing, and you guys remember that movie, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that was one of mine. I thought that would be interesting to see.
Awesome. I had one on my list. I had The Martian meets The Martian Chronicles.
You know what? That's so funny. I was thinking about that earlier. I was like, the same kind of thing. The Ray Bradbury and.
Well, it would be cool because you have Mark Watney that gets stranded on Mars, and then instead of all the science stuff that he's doing, he encounters some crazy Martian crap, and has to deal with surviving until his crew can come find him living among the Martians.
What was the movie? There was a movie a few years ago where they went to Mars. Not a few years ago. This is probably 15 or 20 years. I'm not sure. Where they went to Mars and there was a giant pyramid there, and they went inside. And that ring a bell for you guys? I'm trying to remember who was in it.
I know there's
the only thing I think of when I think of Mars is John Carter, William.
And Pyramids of Mars. I think they did that on Doctor Who at one point too.
Yeah. I think it'd be interesting. I like the idea of having a story where the storylines collide. So
riffing on your idea there, imagine he was doing all the stuff he was doing, but there was another parallel story of the Martians just observing it and watching him fail and watching him do all the stuff as you're going along.
Yeah.
That'd be kind of neat. And then then they collide at some point along the way.
Speaking of The Martian, did either of you see it yet?
I haven't seen it yet.
Just talking to my wife about whether we're going to see it in theater or not. So
my daughter's
I would recommend. I would recommend theater if you can do it. It's definitely a big screen popcorn movie.
She's just like,
I definitely want to see it. I don't know if I'll be able to. I might have to wait till it comes out on Netflix, but it's definitely a must see for me because
we'll definitely watch it. It's just a matter of when.
Yeah.
So this is another one where I kind of hit on something and then changed it. My first thought was Mutiny on the Bounty meets The Walking Dead, but of course that's just zombies on a boat. So then I thought, why not do Mutiny on the Bounty meets The Trouble with Tribbles?
I haven't read any of those, so I have no idea.
The Trouble with Tribbles. The Trouble with Tribbles is a classic Star Trek episode. Yeah. In fact, and if I'm I want to, for some reason, who wrote that? Somebody we know. I was going to say Dean Wesley Smith, but I don't think it was him.
No.
It was somebody else that we've talked about.
Is it J. Daniel Sawyer? He didn't do Star Trek, did he?
Who?
J. Daniel Sawyer? No.
Are you thinking Robert J. Sawyer?
Well, there's another, Robert
But he's
J.
not.
Sawyer.
No, he hasn't.
No, he wouldn't have done it. It beats me. I don't know who would have written that one. Because it's a classic Star Trek universe, right? That's Kirk and Spock.
David Gerald. The script's author was David Gerald.
And he wrote The Man Who Folded Himself, right?
There you go. That's the connection.
That's your connection.
That's the connection that I had in my head. Yeah, because The Man Who Folded Himself, that was a really cool story, which I think, Michael, you've read, and Jamie, you haven't?
I have not read it.
Oh, okay.
I have not read it.
Oh, I thought one of you had.
I have it. I just haven't. It's on my Kindle. Okay. It's gathering dust on my Kindle. I haven't read it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's one of those. I need to
what
read
about
it,
you? You said you had a few on your list, Michael?
Yeah, I had Unicorn Western meets Bone, which I had to think about it for a second. It sounds kind of strange, but hear me out on it, okay? So, they're in a way, they're the same story. Bone is a Western, if you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because Phony Bone, he gets trapped in this strange world. He's a stranger in a strange land, has to travel across and get the girl and get the artifacts that destroy, the rat creatures and King Duck and all those guys. And Unicorn Western is kind of the same thing, right? I mean, Clint, he's a stranger in a strange land. He's Marshall, loses that, and him and Edward have to travel across the sands in order to get to the realm to stop the bad guys. So I don't know. I think it would be interesting if Bone, the Bones ended up in the Unicorn Western world. It would be funny to see them interact with Edward. I don't know. I think that would be funny.
I think that'd be fun. Yeah.
I could see it.
It's kind of a weird mashup, but
Well, when you're mashing stuff up, I mean, it can get pretty weird, right?
Mashup of a mashup of a mashup.
I think Unicorn Western would make a great graphic novel, though.
Oh,
I
for
think
sure.
I could totally see those visually, like Jeff Smith doing a Unicorn Western.
I could see
Awesome.
Unicorn Western as kind of a Samurai Jack style animation,
Yeah, fast moving and like animated for sure.
Yep.
So that was the next one on my list. What about you, Jamie?
It's funny that even the word mashup has been now like co-opted by a game we have called Smash Up, where you're actually. But I'm looking at that, and it's actually neat story ideas. Like you've got these decks of cards that you mix together, and then you play against other players with that. So it could be like steampunk vampires. It can be like time traveling, like bear men or something. Like there's just all these. So it's all creature based stuff. But I don't know. That one just kept getting me. It's like grabbing hold of ideas of just these like weird like monster movie kind of mashup-y things too.
Well, that's like, have you played Flux?
Yeah, there's some. This is better.
Where you can mash, where there's zombie Flux and there's space, and you can mix
Monty
all the decks
Python
together, and
that would get pretty weird. It's weird enough on its own. But
actually, no, what's the other one I was thinking of?
Munchkin.
Munchkins. That's it. Yeah, Munchkins. That's it.
Yeah, there's actually Munchkin Smash Up now too. So they've got some of the characters from that. That's actually a better game. But anyway.
So I think I hit on something by accident too. I was one of the ones I had on my list was Lord of the Flies meets Predator.
Nice.
And then it occurred to me that might have actually been the premise for Lost, which I don't know if you guys watched that.
Yeah,
I will get to Lost.
Where did I hear that? I heard that recently. Someone said something about Lost being kind of like Predator.
And mainly because of, I mean, it's a very, I don't want to say it's a small part of the storyline, but
right.
the whole smoke monster thing, I could see that being part of the genesis of that story. I don't know.
Yeah, it's one of those things like just watch the commentary of Lost and see what the directors say. Mm-hmm. It'd be interesting.
But it would add a level of, you got these little kids trying to survive on this island. And they're, sort of going against each other, and at the meantime, they're also being picked off by some alien that's hunting them one by one.
Yeah. Well, to riff off Lord of the Flies, I think like Battle Royale meets Sherlock Holmes.
How would that work?
All right.
I have no idea. I wrote it down though. Like I don't know.
Well, that's funny because when I was thinking Lord of the Flies originally, I also thought of Battle Royale. I was like, because it was like, oh, I know. How about Hunger Games meets Battle Royale? And I was like, well, wait a minute. That's like a bunch of kids. Right,
every
exactly.
fantasy that's ever been written in the last 5 years, right?
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking like Sherlock. Because I'm thinking of like the recent movies with Robert Downey Jr. because those have a lot of action and fighting in them, and Sherlock's actually a pretty good fighter in those movies. And so I was thinking, well, what if he was trapped on an island and he had to figure his way out, right? And he had to fight all these different people or figure out ways to sabotage them. And so it's more of it's kind of got that mystery element to it, but it's also very cerebral and kind of in your face with the violence.
Sounds like a Doctor Who episode with like Sherlock Holmes and Charles Dickens and
let's just open that up. Let's just open up that time period and make it Battle Royale, but of like the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen type, like all those figures from that time period all going against it.
Yeah, that's Captain Nemo and
like another. There's a lot of games that are smashing up stuff. Like there's a steampunk rally one where they have like all the like Teslas and people like that. Doing like a big rally thing. We can make a book about that too.
Yeah, you could. That'd be interesting.
Yeah, it was like George Washington Carver versus Tesla versus Marie Curie, all building like crazy steampunk vehicles and traveling around.
That should totally be like Super Smash Brothers Classic Edition.
Isn't there? What's that? I have never watched it, but I've heard of the TV show where they do like ninja versus medieval knight, and
they have books of those too, like the warrior. Like there's kids books that do sort of the same kind of thing, but yeah.
But this is one where I think where they actually like computer model the stuff and pit the pirate versus I don't know.
It sounds
here. I don't know.
Yeah, Viking and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. What else do you have, Michael?
I've got. All right, this one I might get some crap for, but Neil Gaiman and Michael Crichton. Like, what if they wrote a book together? Like, where you would have Michael Crichton's thriller, like blockbuster, formulaic Jurassic Park or Andromeda Strain or whatever, right, or Congo, and then you marry that with Neil Gaiman's fantasy and
style,
ethereal writing style and poetic. Like both of them, I think would be interesting storytellers. I mean, obviously that'll never happen, but I wonder what kind of characters they would create, and I wonder what the plots would look like. Because Neil Gaiman's, I mean, he kind of takes his time with, like, say, American Gods, right? Whereas Crichton, he moves really fast.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder what a collaboration between them would have looked like, if it would have happened at all, because they write totally different genres.
So that's another interesting idea too, is these authors who have never worked together, who, what would it look like if they did, kind of thing. Off the top of my head.
Mashups.
Well, it's the best of both worlds, right? Because you've got the huge mainstream appeal of Crichton, right? And then you marry that with kind of the cult classic niche,
but also literary appeal,
right, of Gaiman. So it's like you bring two totally different planets together.
That's like Neil Gaiman writing Doctor Who, which he has done on more than one occasion now.
Yeah, I've got more stuff if you guys
go ahead.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm flipping through my list here to see if I have anything.
All right, this one's kind of, I guess it's kind of generic, right? It has zombies, but I was thinking Fahrenheit 451 meets 100 Days in Deadland. So I've mentioned 100 Days in Deadland here quite a bit.
Yep.
And it's basically, zombies invade or zombies take over, and the hero, it's basically a modern retelling of Dante's Inferno, which goes back to what you were saying earlier, Patrick, that it's easy to start with classics, right?
Yep.
I don't know. What if, like, there was a futuristic world where books were being burned and it was very similar to the Fahrenheit 451, but what if right before Guy, the hero in the book, right before everything hits the fan, right, before he, I don't want to do any spoilers, but before he commits a murder.
If you're going to spoil, I think it's fair to spoil a book that's that old.
Okay, well, right before he kills Beatty, right? Sorry for those people watching who haven't read Fahrenheit 451, but what if right before he kills Beatty, zombie invasion breaks out, and I don't know, the zombies hate books, I don't know, something silly, but I think it would be interesting, like, because you've got the Fahrenheit 451, you've got the, the very Orwellian overtones, and then you've got zombies. I think it would be interesting because zombies are supposed to be like a mirror or a reflection of the society we live in, right? Mm-hmm. The books that are about zombies, they're never really about the zombies. They're about the people and how they react to the zombies. So what would a futuristic zombie book look like that takes place in the year 2500 or the 25th century, like Fahrenheit 451 does? Because most of the books are usually always what would happen if it was in the Victorian era, or what would happen if it was like tomorrow. But what would a futuristic zombie tale look like? I don't know.
Isn't Z2134, that series, that's futuristic, right?
I think so. I haven't read
quite far in the future, I believe. I've read the first one, and it's not 100% clear, sort of exact. If I remember correctly, it's not like 100% clear on exactly when it takes place, but it is clear that it's in the future. Of course, that could, be kind of a bait and switch in book 2 or something. I don't know.
Yeah, and there are androids in there, for like the blockbuster appeal.
Man, they throw zombies into everything, right? I was going to say, you mash up, and again, I haven't seen this, but it's another show that I've heard of, where I think it's like a police procedural where the lead character is a coroner, and she's a zombie who likes to eat brains, but she's also like the mortician or something.
Yeah. I think that's on Hulu. I've seen ads for that.
You can put zombies in anything.
Yeah,
which is probably why a lot of people are sick of zombies.
Yeah, because just throw them in there to be shot or fragged.
But you're right in the sense that it's not about the zombies. Like, I think, if you look at a show like The Walking Dead, that show could very easily it could very easily be the exact same show with an alien invasion instead of zombies.
Yeah.
It's about the characters and how they deal with the apocalypse, and actually, Falling Skies would be The Walking Dead with an alien invasion instead of with zombies. You know, it's the same thing with Battlestar Galactica. You know, that story with those characters could easily be told in, you know, with their a bunch of people leaving one continent and heading to another in ships, and you know, being chased by some other race, or you know, but they stick it in space, and you know, it works. You can do that with any story, I think, if it's about the characters.
That actually, Battlestar Galactica, that brings up something I had on my list too, and I didn't even think about Battlestar Galactica, but like Grapes of Wrath meets like a space opera, right? Have you guys read Grapes of Wrath?
Years and years ago,
okay.
Probably.
Well, it's similar to Battlestar Galactica in that, you know, the Joad family is leaving Oklahoma because of the Dust Bowl, and they're traveling to California, right? They're traveling to a better land, which is kind of what they're doing in Battlestar Galactica, right? I've only seen a few episodes, so I'm not terribly familiar with the Battlestar Galactica series, but like that whole idea of a pilgrimage, but you put that in space. Like of a
okay, so then how about Beverly Hillbillies in space?
Oh, that's awesome! I love that. Beverly Hillbillies meets.
Oh, it's speaking of which, I read something today that they're rebooting Fantasy Island. Now that's a show that could probably use some zombies.
It's like that. It's like that trope, right? Where if your story's getting old, just throw a guy in there with a gun. Just like it's just if your story's lagging, just throw some zombies in it.
Or if you're Stephen King, just nuke everything.
Yeah. I like that.
One thing
something like that.
One thing I was thinking about that I'd like to see is because I love the way I've talked about so many times, like the Colleen McCullough Rome series, with these epic sort of rise of political figures and the machinations of what's going on in the, you know, and everything to do with this incredible republic. But it was, you know, when the politics of Rome were a huge part of that, as well as the military and whatever. And setting something like that in space and doing it well, I think could be really, really cool. Because I know some of the epic, like, Dune stuff tends in that direction a little bit, but I don't know, with some of these leaders and like having, and you know, it's some of the stuff that they tried to do a crappy job, like bolting that on to Star Wars in the original trilogy and some of the Clone Wars stuff, because there is some stuff related to that, and not fleshed out like I would like, and not, you know, not a vehicle where they like to do that. But I don't know.
There's so many of these mashups. Like I had, and again, I'm going to guess who's read this. I think it was Michael. Cinder.
Yeah, you mentioned that one.
Yeah,
that's Cinderella in space, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had that on my list, or I was going to put it on my list, but yeah, it's like Cinderella in space, and she falls in love, but she's like an android, and I liked it from what I read. It was interesting.
What I was going to save it for next week, but what I'm reading right now, and then what I'm going to read afterwards, is not so much a mashup as like a telling from a different point of view, which is, so I'm reading Beowulf,
awesome.
And then I'm going to read Grendel,
okay,
which is the story of Beowulf told through the point of view of the monster.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, you know, again, it's not a mashup, but retelling an old story like that from a different perspective, from the perspective of the villain. You know, we talked about, I was remembering we were talking about reboots, because I can't remember, and Matt Brotherton mentioned it on his podcast this past weekend, the New Writer podcast. Same kind of thing, like if you wanted to reboot, or if you didn't want to reboot a series, or if you wanted to kind of continue a series from a different perspective, you know, to just kind of flip it and tell the same story, you know, Star Wars through Darth Vader's eyes, I don't know.
Yeah, or like
to get a little more mileage out of your.
The one idea that I did have that's related to that I was like, I probably wouldn't write it ever someday, but the plague story told from the perspective of the Native Americans, because you know how all the smallpox and stuff killed off so many, and it ravaged. Like there's some of the stuff I've been reading from some of the like the nature books before, was talking about how that it just went through by wildfire and killed off huge swaths of the population, and that's why the forests regrew. And so it's like that is a plague story, but it would be really interesting to see that written well in and how it impacted some of those cultures and just the perspectives of the people that were the survivors in that setting before the white man came and then is this big invader as well, right? So I think that could be really neat.
We have a comment, and Kate Morgan says, if my window will come back up, Kate Morgan says, or, when we were talking about zombies, preface this, or in the case of Jane Austen, zombies is about the comedy, because dear God, zombies and Jane Austen, oogly face.
I think, and those books probably started out as an easy way to get something out there. First of all, I think because you're just adding zombies to an existing story. But it's funny that I believe that one is it Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. One of those stories is actually being made into, I'm going to say a movie, but it could be a TV show. I think it's probably a movie.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it is a movie. It's supposed to be out next year or something like that.
I think I'll take a pass on that one.
Yeah, I'll probably pass on it too. I had another one on my list. What if Jack London and Robert Louis Stevenson wrote a book together? I think that would be interesting. Like, it's Robert Louis Stevenson, it's Treasure Island.
Yep.
Jack London is Call of the Wild, White Fang. So they're both very much in that same genre of adventure. They just happen to be writing in, a couple of different decades apart.
And I haven't read Jack London, so...
Patrick, did you know that Matt Smith is going to be in Pride and Prejudice and Zombies?
I'm still going to pass.
That's kind of crazy.
Even Doctor Who.
Okay, so if you're gonna talk Doctor Who, Jamie, as the expert, let's get your opinion for one moment, and then we'll start thinking about wrapping up. How do you feel?
I'm 2 weeks behind, by the way.
Oh well, I don't. So then I don't know if you'll be able to answer this or not.
Yeah. No spoilers.
How do you feel about the sonic sunglasses?
I'm okay with it.
Okay.
The sonic screwdriver came out of nowhere one season, and became too big of a thing, so they de-emphasized it. They got rid of it. They brought it back. It's just a thing.
True enough, I guess. And
I'm
I'm
still
actually
stuck on Aliens of London, so
stuck
I'm
on
way
what?
behind you guys. It's the Aliens of London episode.
Which is how far
Which
back?
is,
Like episode
Chris
6.
Eccleston. Yeah, it's way back.
Okay.
I'm like 10 years behind on Doctor Who. So.
We're actually ahead of you in our rewatch of it. So Doctor Who's like, I've said it before, but Doctor Who's like the ultimate mashup show because they can go anywhere, do anything, and they really have. Like, you want to make Shakespeare this week? You can. You want to kill Hitler this week? You can. You want to, do an alien invasion thing or a plague story or whatever.
Just resets next week.
What's that, Michael?
I said it just resets the next week.
You would think so, and a lesser show would probably do that, like the do that reset, but they do an amazing job of continuing having those story arcs, and things actually don't reset all that often.
Since 1975, so. But anyway, yeah. Early on, it was there was some continuity of stuff, but yeah. But it's a great show.
So it sounds like we're winding down here.
Just a last-minute check of the comments.
Yeah, and did you have any? I know you had kind of a list, Michael. Did you have any others that you wanted to?
I had a few more, but nothing crazy.
Ahead.
The only one I thought that would be worth discussing would be Tolkien and Shakespeare. Like, what if they wrote a book?
Goodness.
Now, it would probably put you to sleep.
Read it.
but I think it would be interesting. Like, I wonder what Shakespeare would have thought of the whole Lord of the Rings thing. Like, maybe he could have. I don't know. They're very similar in terms of their approach, right? I mean, they're very high concept.
What I am, and I've not read either, past what was expected in high school, but one thing I did find interesting in reading, so the introduction to Beowulf, was that I guess Tolkien was kind of obsessed with Beowulf, and
he was an Anglo-Saxon scholar first.
Now the book I'm reading, the translation that I'm reading, I think was released a while back, because in that introduction they said that Tolkien wrote a never released his own translation and essays on Beowulf, which now I think actually has been released. Maybe a couple years ago, the family put it out there. So that was interesting, and of course he used that story as sort of a launching off point maybe for Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, or inspiration for.
Inspiration for his new British mythology that he wanted to create, which was Lord of the Rings. So
yeah. I love Beowulf. Grendel not so much, but I'd be curious to hear what you think of it, Patrick.
Yeah, and it's so hard to know what you're reading, in the sense that, so I know it's an epic poem, but this telling of it is in prose.
Yeah.
Which is which I think is also in line with the translation that I'm reading of the Odyssey, which is kind of written. It's you never know if what you're reading, how close it is to the original, I guess.
Yeah.
Especially if it's not in poem form anymore. But I just want to get the gist of the story.
Right. Cool. Tell me what you think once you finish it.
Yeah, I'll finish that. They're both pretty short. I mean, Beowulf is like 90 pages. That includes all of the front matter. And Grendel is kind of a fairly short book as well. I'll definitely wrap those up this week. You said you had a couple. You got one last one on your list before we wrap it up?
I just had... I'm trying to decide. I guess I had Roald Dahl in the Arabian Nights, which I wasn't really thinking when I put that down. I just like, oh, Roald Dahl, because I was going through my Goodreads list, and it's like, oh, Roald Dahl, okay. Arabian Nights, it's like right next to it, so okay. But, the whole rogue storytelling of the Arabian Nights meets the very refined, silly storytelling of Dahl. I think it could be interesting.
Kind of makes me think.
I would read it.
Kind of makes me think that they touched on that a little bit with Disney's Aladdin.
Yeah, they did a little bit. It's kind of got that same spirit. And I don't think Aladdin was one of the Arabian Nights, but I think the story was originally Chinese, but it was adapted, and it ended up in because the thing about the Arabian Nights is it's all these different stories from all these different places, like in the Middle East and from Asia, and they just kind of got all mashed together, and so no one really knows what the actual original 1001 Nights were. It's just been mashed up throughout the years. So, cool. Yeah, that's all I got.
Okay. So we do not have a guest or a topic yet for next week, and hopefully, Jamie, you think you're going to be with us next week? Jamie has a new job for our listeners, and it's killing him. So if he sounds tired tonight, it's because he's working 60-hour weeks right now?
No, it's not like that, but it's just going from what I was doing to this is just different.
So hope you all have a great reading week, and we will talk to you next Tuesday. Have a good one.
Go Jays.